Hi, welcome. I just recorded about an hour and a half, about an hour of video that was worked, but was probably more confusing than it needed to be. So I'm going to try to do a summary here and just use this video instead. Because I already did this before, all of the code has already been written. So you're not going to. So there's not going to be a lot of code in this one. There's not going to be a lot of writing code. Instead, we're going to read code that I've already written. As always, the code's going to be available to you through the GitHub. If you have any questions, please contact me on Omnivox, and I'm going to try to make the code available as well as not just trying to make the code available. I'm going to make the code available along with this video, but more importantly is I'm going to try to make sure that next week we have class, and even if not next week, like the week. There's a couple of weeks here where it's a little bit confusing about making class, but I will do my best to make sure that we have some sort of class, even if it's just online, so that you are able to follow along with everything that's going on here, because it is a lot and we're moving pretty fast. So hopefully the video means that you can at least go over it a few times. Now, what we're covering today is we're covering two things. We're covering navigation, we're covering storage, and we're going to cover a third thing, and that third thing is we're going to cover rewriting our app to be more in a React JSX style. So these are mostly React related things, and some of these are React Native related things, and I will, as always, try to parse and try to make sure I'm making clear what's what. So for starters, you can see based off of the whoops, let me actually switch. Okay, so you can see my screen now. So you can see based off of the color of the files, which files I edited by adding stuff to, which files I created or rewrote, and which files I just added things to. First off is we've imported a couple new packages. These are all, one of these is an async storage package. Excuse me. This package is the package we use to keep track of data. It's the storage pack. It's the one that stores things. And then I've got a couple of React Native, native React navigation for React Native and the native stack. And I'll explain a few more of that, along with we've got native safe area context and native safe area screens. React Native screens, which are additional just supplemental packages required to run our navigation. So first thing, I'm just going to show you how I changed my app. My app now looks like this. Instead of the home, we have this app navigator component is the component that's there. So if we open the app navigator component, you'll see what it looks like. I'm not going to talk about it yet. I'm going to talk about it in a minute. And you'll see also that I changed the app so that the app is now a function, const app, and we export that function instead of doing the export default all in one line. This is just a different style of programming. It doesn't really do anything aside from look different and get in the habit of the JSX style. It doesn't really matter much, and these are the kinds of things that as long as you know how to read them, you're good. Next, we're going to look at the app navigator. So the app navigator is in the navigation, and it is our first navigation tool. In theory, we can have multiple navigation tools we can have multiple navigations for any given app or any given React project, because think about your components, right? What a component means is, hey, this piece goes here, and then I plug in another piece inside of it. So the same way that to start with, I have my app, which takes in the app navigator, and the app navigator has a navigation stack, has a navigation container. It can have multiple navigation containers, right? It could navigate, different parts of my app can navigate to different places. Or one of my screens might have a couple of side screens, right? Like my history might have my current history and my long-term history, or something else like that. And there I have multiple navigations, one inside each other. And if I did something like that, I would have multiple navigations. That is why I have an app navigator, but I might have other navigators, and so therefore I have other navigation screens. That's why I have a navigation folder for potentially multiple components. The size of our current app, we're probably not going to do that. Now, in here, we've done a couple of things that are related to navigation, but since we're starting with asynchronous storage, we're going to look at our home component first. Now, our home component has been pretty seriously rewritten. We've added this use effect. What does use effect do? It is a way for us to reference tools that are outside of the component. So if we need React to use something that is not inside the component, we use the useEffect function. Now, you'll notice here that my home screen is now a component similar to the way that my app is, and we've takes in navigation as an object. What passes navigation? The app navigator does. I'll explain more in depth in a little bit. More importantly, though, is we've got useEffect. What does useEffect do? It says, hey, I need to access something outside of my app. In this case, it's the async storage. Also note that useEffect comes from React, so if we wanted to look up what is useEffect, we would do React useEffect, and we see that it's a React hook. Now, React hooks are a big deal. There's a lot of them, and they are like really fundamental to how it works, how React works in general. The big idea of a React hook is that React has a React component has a life cycle. It's created, you interact with it, it passes information, and then eventually it's destroyed. All along that life cycle, you can hook into it to cause certain things to happen. That's what hooks, that's the kind of the basic idea of hooks. They're a lot more complex than that. And as you can see over here, there's quite a few of them. We've already been using the useState hook from last time. But there are a bunch of others. There's useCallback, useContext, and each of these does something different. UseEffect is used to connect to an external system. In this case, in our use case, the external system that we're connecting to is the external system. Sorry about that. I had the project open twice for some reason. The external system that we're connecting to is the async storage system. So all this whole useEffect thing is just to access async storage. What does async storage do? Async storage lets us set and get an item. It lets us store and retrieve certain data. What is the data that we're retrieving here? It's our habits, right? That's basically all the data we have in this app. So what happens? UseEffect, when the app starts, we just run the useEffect, which runs a function which creates, loads a function, and then runs the function that it created. What is the function that it created? Load habits. What does load habits do? It tries to access async storage and get out the habits. If it gets the habits, if there's any stored data, it takes that data, it does JSON.parse, which is basically take a string that is a JSON object and convert it into a JSON object, and then set that value to habits, and we know what set habits does from last class. If there's some error with this, we do console.log error. So useEffect is when the app starts up, we're going to load in our habits. So now we're actually storing habits. What does that look like in practice? If I go over here, if I refresh my screen, now you see the word hello is stored. And if I add another habit, whoops, I actually need to run the app. Excuse me. I'm running the app, right? So the word hello is scored, and if I do junk, I can add junk to it, and I can add hooray. Right, and I can go to history, and I can come back to this page, and everything is still there. I can even refresh the app, and I can even shut down the app, and these are still stored. These are actually being stored in my, I believe it's in my browser data. And we can we'll use browser tools next time we're together to investigate that a little bit more. But the important thing here is this data is actively being stored. When is it stored? Whenever I add a habit, we do const new habits. We actually create, last time what we were doing is we were just creating the new habit, and we're doing set habits to the new habit, and then we were setting the habit to reset. Instead, over here, what we're doing is we are doing set habits to this new habits array, which follows the logic of what we did last class. And then we did save habits, which saves our new habits. And that's a second function that we've added here, which is takes in the new habits, which is an array, and all it does is set item habits. JSON.stringify save, and if there's an error, it says, hey, we failed to save the habits for whatever reason. And it gives us the reason. Lastly is my component has been updated, right? This is not working, so I'm going to delete that for now. And I'm also going to delete references to it in here, but I'm going to talk about my component. My component now has a button that is go to history. And when I click on the Go to History button on press, run the function, run this little function. This function does navigation, which remember navigation was sent into my home screen component, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But we're going to transition to talking about navigation now. We do navigation.navigate to history. So, what is going on with my navigation? I do create navigation. The first thing that you'll notice is in my app navigator component, I have create native stack navigator. This is a object that we're naming stack. Notice over here, we have the navigation container, which is just a outer container, which is a object. And then we've got our stack.navigator, which stack is from here. So I create some sort of a stack navigator thing, and then I do stack.navigator, and then I do stacks.screen, and then we have another stack.screen. And each screen gets a declaration of its name and the component that it references. So we are no longer loading the components directly. Instead, we are saying, hey, stack, hey, navigator, right, which is my stack navigator, right? Hey, navigator, I need you to be aware of all of these different screens. So we're going to start with the home. We have got the home and we've got the history. And those are two screens. What should they load? They should load up these components. But I'm no longer directly loading the components. Instead, I'm using my stack navigator to manage the components. So what is the stack navigator? The stack navigator is from our React navigation, React native stack. So if we look this up, and I'm going to React navigation. React navigation is a separate part of React that handles navigation. The native stack navigator provides a way for your app to transition between screens, each new screen being placed on top of the stack. What does that mean that it's placed on top of the stack? We spoke a little bit about this in the past few weeks. When a stack is a kind of data structure. It's a way of organizing data where if you think of literally just a stack of anything, stack just means one goes on top of another. You got a stack of books or a stack of pancakes, that's a stack. One goes on top of another, goes on top of another, goes on top of another. The React stack, the native stack navigator is using that logic. So I've got my home screen and then I've got my history on top of it. And then when I leave my history page, I say I go back, I take the history off of the page, I take the history off of the stack, and what's left is my home page. So if I go home, history, and then let's say for somehow I had a button on history that let me go back to home. Now I've got I would already have three things on my stack. And then from home I went to, let's say, my details page. So now I've got details, home, history, home. So if I started pushing back, that's the order I would go in. And now you can do this with apps. As you start to pay more and more attention to these sorts of things, you can get into, like, you can understand how something that you've learned natively, like something that you're used to, like, just naturally flowing through is a lot more complex than that. And this is like phone app navigation is one of those things. So all of this, and there's a lot of like installation that has to go into it. There's a lot of background stuff, and I recommend you read like the details on the React navigation to get a little bit more of a detail of how this works. But the basic idea, the basic idea is that I've got this create native stack, and I've got this navigator that's going on here. Now, if you look at the home screen itself, you notice on top of the right, we've got view, and I've got my standard view that everything else is inside of. But you'll notice that I start over here with a view, and I've put a bunch of stuff inside my view. But if you look at my app, let's see if it does local host. It's not 3500, I believe it's, is it 8000? No, it's not 8,000. It is 8081. Localhost 8081. Notice over here that like my habits, this whole screen is starting inside of my. There's this navigation bar at the top. This navigation bar at the top is being added by my app navigator. This is that whole app navigator container. This is a stack. And notice how when I go to history, all of a sudden I have this little history with the little back thing. This is telling me the name of the component, and hey, it's letting me navigate away from it. right? I can navigate to it using thing, and I can actually go back. And I did this about 4 or 5 times. I'm pretty sure in this video. I know I've done it a bunch in the other video when I was initially demoing the app before we actually saw anything. Now, really quickly, I haven't spoken about the history page much just because it's a very boring page right now. It's literally just like, hey, I exist. Eventually stuff will be added to me. That's next week's conversation. But we need a second one to demonstrate our navigation, so we created it now. More importantly is to understand this idea that this back and this home, right, the name of the component and the change between them, all of that is being handled by a separate component, which is my app navigator. So my app is now just referencing my app navigator, and my app navigator is handling this stack, right? So stack.navigator is saying, hey stack, create native stack navigator, which creates my native stack navigator. Now I need this component from that particular stack, which is a general navigator, and I'm going to create a couple screen components from there. And so I'm actually not loading the home, I'm loading a screen component, a stack screen with the home screen component, which loads up the home screen component as an argument. That's the basic idea of what's going on here. Hopefully it's clear. So the way that navigation is being handled is by this third-party component and by this third-party library, like most of our other stuff. But the logic of how it's being handled is with a stack. And we are no longer directly loading our components. And this is where we start talking about how components go inside components, because that is how React works. I don't know if you can hear this or not, but I'm losing my voice a little bit. Hopefully this is clear. Hopefully this gives you an update. As I said, the code will be available to you, and I will try to make sure that we do at least a virtual class next week as we go through this stuff. In the meantime, enjoy the week, and good luck.